What's up everyone, Steven here from TechMaker. This is building an NFT bookstore part 7. In the last episode, we essentially finished up the core functionality of purchasing a book. As far as the mechanics go, we have the storefront, purchase from author, and then we have over here, we have a bookstore with a purchase from author function, which goes ahead and transfers the book once the token has actually been transferred here. And some of the security is handled actually in the ERC20. You saw what happened when we tried to transfer from message.sender to the author. If they didn't have enough allowance, it fails, and so on and so forth. So some of that's handled in the ERC20. But one thing I want to do in this video is go ahead and start setting up some tests and implementing some other security models. So for example, over here in our bookstore contract, anybody right now can call this purchase from author. And all they have to do is pass in the address of a buyer and a book version ID. And essentially what it's going to do is safe transfer from the author to the buyer and give them a book, or a book version rather. So we don't want that. So what we need to do here, for example, is make sure that the message sender is always the storefront, which basically means you're only able to make a purchase via this contract and you cannot talk directly to the bookstore, if that makes sense. And I believe we could call this sort of a proxy contract, this storefront, which acts as a proxy for this bookstore. One sort of nice thing, and this is kind of a side point, we could actually set up a method that's only owner, for example, or only the person who deployed the contract, which is adjusting the storefront. So if we ever wanted to change the storefront logic, we could deploy a new contract and then update the bookstore. So anyway, that would make that like a true proxy where we have a reusable bit of code and we can like deploy new code and update the core logic. So that's an interesting thing. We'll get more into the architecture later. I think in this episode, I just want to kind of get us set up with some basic testing stuff that we need and then start working on the security a little bit, and then we'll see where we get to. So to do this, what we're going to do is actually install another package. So we're using Truffle, and so far we've just been using some built-in assert, which I think is coming from Mocha, if I'm not mistaken. Anyway, I'm not sure. I'm kind of on the newer side of JavaScript testing, so maybe it's Mocha or something. Anyway, whatever. What I want to do though is I want to add this truffle-assertions, which adds some smart contract specific tests. And specifically, we're going to use one, I don't know if it's going to be listed here in the documentation, but it's going to be assert revert. So let's just kind of install this and see where we get to. So we'll copy this, and then I'm going to move this out of the way over here off screen. And I'm just going to paste that into my file here, or into my terminal here. And what I want to do is, I'm going to copy in something from off camera also. So back over in my test, this is in that documentation that I just had up for truffle assertions. But at the very top, I'm going to paste in truffle assert up here. And let's just do truffle test really quick to make sure we don't get any errors just from that. But while that's running, I'm going to go ahead, I'm going to assume that it's going to work. And we've got some to-dos in here we need to come back and look at. What I want to do, where am I at? Purchasing from the author. We could make a section on security separately. That could be an interesting way to do that. I'm not sure if that's a good idea or not, but let's try it out. So what I'm going to do, first of all, let me kind of make sure I'm in the right place. So I'm underneath the describe there. So what we can do is say describe security, and then we'll pass in an empty function. And we will want this to be async, so I'll go ahead and put that there. Async. And then what I'm going to do first, and I'm going to start with just this test for the bookstore. We'll say something like it won't allow anyone but the storefront to purchase from author. Okay, so we'll say it won't allow anyone but the storefront to call purchase from author. And what I'm going to do here, this is a little bit of syntax that's more from Ruby, but I don't know what you would do in JavaScript. So we'll say bookstore, like this is the contract, and then # purchase from author. So that's how you indicate in Ruby, like an instance method. I don't know what that is in JavaScript, so I'm just going to do it like that because I know what it means. And then we'll need to do async, and then open up a new function here. And basically all I want to do is say, let's do like first of all, let's come up here and copy in some of our setup. So I'll have const storefront, bookstore, storefront, and let's just come down, and I'm gonna have to actually do more than that. I'm gonna have to do quite a fair amount of setup, I guess, because I need to get all the way to the point where I publish, right? So maybe I should actually copy some stuff from where I publish up here. So basically all the way up to there should be what we want. Okay, sorry, I'm gonna paste all that in. So we're setting up a new storefront. We're setting up a new bookstore, which we may rename to something like bookstore backend or something like that. We've got a price, a currency, a quantity. We have an author, and we're publishing. Okay, so that should be good enough for me to have everything that I need. Because basically what I want to try to do is call this purchase from author with an address that I'm going to, wrong button. Then I'm going to hard code. And then I'm going to pass in the ID 1. And we don't want it to fail when we try to look up the book or anything like that. We want it to try to execute, and we want to prove that it doesn't work. Specifically, what we want to do is prove that it fails where we want it to fail. So we don't want it to fail for other reasons. We want it to fail because essentially what we need to do is write a failing test. But that failing test, we're going to expect it to fail. So what that means is it should actually succeed at first, and then when we add the security layer, it should start reverting. Hopefully that's clear. It's a little bit of sort of like double negative kind of stuff there, but so here's what we're going to do. We're going to say truffle-assert .assert revert. I think we're going to do it. Assert revert. Let me actually do a quick Google for that. Let's pull this up just to make sure I've got the syntax right. I don't want to. Let's do truffle-assert revert. Truffle-assertions. Let's do a find here for revert. Asserting reverts. Maybe this is going to take us where we want to go. Let's see, revert. That's a lot of, okay, there it is. So what we want to do is truffle-assert.reverts. Okay, there we go. Get that out of the way here. So truffle-assert.reverts. We're going to await this from the outside. And then in here, we're going to say bookstore dot purchase from author. We're going to pass in some random address. So we're going to say like accounts 3, something like that. It doesn't really matter. And then we'll give it the ID 1, like that. And let's see. We should actually say, so that is the API. Accounts 3, 1. And that would be fine if it was coming from, so essentially it would be fine if it was coming from storefront.address. So does that make sense? Hopefully it makes sense. So if we look at the API for this bookstore, so purchase from author, so we're passing in an address, we're passing in a book version ID, okay? And basically what we want is we want it to come from the storefront. So this would be right. But what we want to test is that it's coming from somewhere else. So let's say that it's account 3 trying to do this on its own. So we would like this to fail. And we also want it to fail with a specific message so we can figure out where it came from later. Because if you don't give your failures a message, it's very hard to sort out. So let's just say something like method can only be called by storefront contract, something like that. Okay, let's go ahead and run this and let's see what happens. I bet that we basically have everything set up correctly, and I think this is going to work. I think it's going to tell us it expected to revert, but it did not. So that's what I was talking about earlier. It's expecting a failure, but it's going to pass. Hopefully that's what it does. Okay. So we got a different error. So this is why we give it this message from the start, because otherwise we would be tricked. So it expected to fail with method can only be called by storefront contract, but it failed with a different error. Let's see. Returned error VM transaction is not owner nor approved. So we sort of have this security already built in, actually, because of the allowance structure of our ERC20. So basically the storefront is only allowed to transfer. So this would sort of, if we had forgotten to do this, we might actually be fine. But what I want to do is go ahead and add the security. So we won't get this to fail in the way that I thought we would, because where you would have to do some like crazy stuff to bypass this ERC 1155 stuff, which we don't want to do. So what I'm going to do instead is just say, okay, this is good enough. We just want to make this fail with our message now. So the reason for this, like, I guess technically you could make the argument that this isn't quite necessary at this point, but the truth is I like to be very explicit. And so here, all we need to do, because I kind of put this in earlier as a to-do, let's see, the storefront is an address, I think. No, okay, that's just the wrong syntax. Okay, so the storefront is a storefront. So what I want to do is address storefront, like that. And so basically what this is doing is saying, before we do anything, require that the message sender is the storefront. And I'm going to go ahead and just copy this message in here. And so the second argument to the require here is just going to be the message. That's not what I meant to copy. Okay, let me try that again. Just going to grab that string and put that right here, hopefully. Okay, cool. Let's run the test again and see if we're green. And I think this might be where we stop. I wanted to get all this set up, but I need to kind of map out what other things we need to check the security for. Okay, cool. So now we're set up to test failures, and now you know how to test for revert. This truffle-assert library looks to be pretty useful all around, but I haven't dug into it much beyond testing the reverts. So yeah, I think the next thing I'm going to do is off camera, so on my own time, outside of the video, I'm going to go through and just kind of document. I mean, these are really, if you think about it, these are pretty small contracts for our 166 lines of tests. We have, a 27 line file, which we could tighten up and it would be less. And then we have our bookstore, which is, 50 lines of code more or less. So it's actually not a ton of code. So we shouldn't have too many entry points we have to worry about. But I think one of the things I want to do also is like, before we move on to actually building out this sort of like purchase from marketplace functionality, I'm gonna focus on a few other minor features. Like, for example, one thing I think I want to do is make sure that we keep track of which author, like, so what I want to do actually, and we have this sort of shimmed into our test over here with this book ID. So one of the things I think I want to do is pass in some kind of book ID, which we'll store in here somewhere. And then whenever somebody tries to publish a book version, what I want to do is make sure that address is actually the owner of that book ID. So nobody else could come along later and say, I'm going to publish, a counterfeit of that book ID and trick people into thinking that it's the original or something. And, you could you could definitely do that just with our current setup, as long as you keep track of the book version that the author is the same one. But I think we can provide some kind of convenience functionality with the book version, or the book ID actually, that's more global. So that's something I want to kind of work on, I think. And I need to map out any other security concerns, and we'll get all that taken care of. And then I'm trying to decide, like, do I want to take what we have so far and start working on a React app for it? Or do I want to go ahead and push this all the way to where there's like a marketplace? I tend to like to kind of build out a chunk of something and then move on to the next thing and kind of go back and forth a little bit. That's just sort of my style, because if you build too many things up front, sometimes it can be hard to like coordinate. I also tend to like to try to let the front end inform the back end a little bit, because I put user experience sort of at the front typically. I wanted to go ahead and get a core set of functionality finished so that on the front end we would actually have something to code against. So I've got a few ideas for how to do this. What I want to do is actually create sort of a React series that people can kind of tap into even if they haven't followed along with this. So I'm probably going to deploy these contracts to some test net, so that people don't even actually have to do the smart contract themselves if they don't want to, and everybody can actually build their own user interface on top of the smart contracts that I deploy to the test net. So that'll be kind of cool in theory. So we'll see how that goes. But at the same time, now that I'm just kind of thinking through it out loud, which I do on these videos if you've been following along for very long, we will need to make it so that we can change the storefront contract at some point, so that we can actually swap that out. So we'll need let me write a to-do in here. To-do create set the storefront method that's only owner. Something like that. And the reason for that is because what that will allow us to do is essentially deploy this and deploy this bookstore. And then later on, we'll be able to deploy a new storefront with new functionality and then update that in our front end. It's kind of the idea I have right now. So I'm going to map a little bit more of this out on paper, and we'll come back probably tomorrow or the next day. It's a holiday today, but I wanted to go ahead and get out something. So either tomorrow or Tuesday, we'll put out a couple more videos on this, and I think probably middle of the week, if things go the way I'm thinking right now, middle end of this week, we'll be getting into some React and starting to do that. So anyway, hopefully you're enjoying this series, and I will talk to you in the next episode.